Hi, this is David Odell with OdellCompleteConcrete. Today I'm going to be showing you how to build your own patio and side yard. So this is a little two-story unit. I think there's about 8 or 10 units in this building. But we got dirt in the back portion of it, and we got dirt on the sides. Really unusable space. And then we got some drainage issues we got to deal with. So we're going to put some drains in back here. And we're going to take a lot of dirt out of here, because I guess what happened at one point is the water, the way they have this dirt, because it's up so high and it's draining towards the building there, it went into the buildings, went into some of the units, the actual water, when it drained out of here. So we're going to take about 6 inches of dirt out of here, and we're going to put drains all through the middle and slope the concrete to the drains. The drain's going to go out this direction, out that side yard there. We're going to tear that gate down. Yeah, it's got to go all the way through here. This drain and the concrete's going to go. See that big old stump right there? That was a nightmare getting out, believe me. Not much space in here to get any kind of power tools in here to knock that big stump out. So it was all handwork. Then we had to move some satellite dishes and stuff like that. Kind of blocking the whole pathway here, so we had to disconnect some satellite dishes. Right now what we're going to do is just get the dirt down. Getting the dirt out of here, we're going to take it right through the hallway of this apartment complex, right into my dump trailer. The dirt was pretty soft, so it came out pretty easy. I mean, you could just stick your shovel in there, because I think what they did is this block wall that somebody did, you can see that it's not very well done, but it was pretty recently done. But when they dug the dirt out of that footing, I think they just threw it right here, and it created the drainage problem basically. So now we got to take all that loose dirt out. I think we generated about 15 tons. Yeah, 15 tons of dirt came out of this little backyard area. I'm gonna run a 3-inch drain line all the way around, right through the middle, and then I'll have some area drains popping up centered in each little section. And I'll give it about an inch and a half slope to the drain from all the sides, like the side of the house, the side of the block wall. We'll put the drain 1.5 inches low. Then also we're going to sink in a couple of CB44s, which is the metal brackets for some posts, because we're going to divide this back patio area up into 2 sections, so that way each one of these units in the back have their own little backyard enclosed area. So we'll just wet set those when we pour concrete. 4x4 post stirrups. Now what I'm doing here is I'm checking the existing patio over here, and that's going to be my fixed elevation, because that's about 2 inches below the floor level in that unit. And so I'm going to transfer that slab height right over to the wall. I'm going to make it level. Or actually, I may make the wall just a little bit lower, just in case we get a backup on a drain. The water will still run away from the building. And then, of course, I'll have the edges of the concrete, like on the side yards, lower than everything else. That way, if the drain backed up, the water could still fill up and then flow out towards the side yard before it went into the house. So drains are great, but you always got to think about, well, what if it does clog? Then where does it go? So that's when you got to make the end points and a low point somewhere where the water can actually go right before it goes into the building, of course. And sometimes they do clog, and usually the reason they clog is because of leaves. Leaves and stuff like that accumulate over the grate, and then you get a clogged drain. I'll be putting some expansion foam all along this block wall. This gate I'm going to tear off the wall. It's got a lot of dry rot, termites anyway, so I'm just going to rip it off, especially when I get ready to pour concrete. Because it's hard to finish concrete when you got to swing the gate open and closed and work around it. So I just like taking gates off, especially when I get ready to pour concrete. Once we get this dirt out of here, then we can focus on the trenching for the drains itself. And that's a pretty good run. I think we're about 150 feet of drain line. The problem with this drain line we're putting in is we can't get it to the street because that would require removing a lot more concrete that's already in place, or saw cutting a trench through it, but we're not going to do that. What we'll do is we're going to daylight it at the end, just making sure that where it comes out is lower than where it goes in, the water I'm speaking of. So that last drain on the system has to be lower than these back drains, so that way the water can fill up in the drain, and then it'll push out of the lowest drain point. And that means you would have standing water basically in that drain pipe until it either evaporated, or in this case what I did at the low end of the pipe, I created a French drain system, and I went perforated on my last 10 feet. Solid, everything else, perforated at my last 10 with some fabric wrapped around that so the dirt doesn't go into the pipe. That way it allows the water to go out. So on a heavy downpour, you'd fill up the pipe pretty quickly, and then it would exit, flow out the end low point. And then whatever's left over in that pipe would just drain into the dirt. So you won't be putting too much water into the ground. Just whatever is left over in the pipe basically after a good heavy rainfall. And that's the idea of this system I'm putting in. And in the future, we plan on potentially taking out some more concrete all the way to the street, and that could be phase 2, and then we can attach underground to the new pipe and go all the way out. Now here's the layout for the pipe that's going to go in. I threw in a little 45-degree angle there. 45s are nice in drain systems because if you ever did have to snake it or anything like that, it snakes out a lot easier than trying to hit a 90 in these drains. I mean, you could always get a sweep, but 45s work better. So I'm just holding a string line where I want to put the drain. The reason I want that nice and straight is because that's where my area drains are going to come up. And it looks good when you stand back and look at it that all your drains are in line. So you want your trench to be straight right off the top. Now we're going to start about 6 inches deep at the high end. By the time we get to the other end, we'll be a good foot. And top of drain from the rear to top of drain in the front is going to be a good 6 inches difference. So that's what I mean by the water being able to come out of the last drain, because that's the low spot, even though it's a foot below grade. Now this is some old units. I don't know how long this thing's been here, probably about 100 years. And you can kind of tell by this block wall. So the trench looks kind of crooked at this point, but where I've determined where my area drain pop-ups are going to be, they're going to be centered in each section. Like we have a larger section where we start at, so we had to push the drain over so it's centered in that square. Then we angled over so we're centered in the next square, and so on. Now, since we have a chalk line on the block wall and we have a chalk line around the house, all those chalk lines and fixed concrete points that we're matching are basically level, so we can just pull a line across at any point over the drain, and we just want to put the drain, top of drain, about 1.5 inches below that line, so that means we have 1.5 inches slope from every point. Yeah, for digging these drain pipes, the easiest tool to use is a trenching shovel, because you're moving the least amount of dirt and it's big enough to get your pipe in. So if you use a square or a round point, you got to move twice as much dirt. So I like using a trenching shovel for this. Yeah, it's pretty tight quarters. Like, well, when these buildings here were built, one building was built right on the property line, which is really rare to see until you get into these old areas like this. Then I guess it's pretty common. So that basically is zero space between the property line and the next building. This house actually has 3 feet, which is real. They don't do that anymore. I mean, you'll be lucky to get 5 feet. 5 feet's kind of the norm on your setbacks nowadays, but this one was done with a 3-footer. So you get something like this, it's not something you want to modify a whole lot, because I mean, otherwise you got to meet the new building codes, which means in this case you wouldn't have much of a building left. Not a whole lot of forms to set in a job like this, since we're wall to wall with the concrete, the new concrete going in. I think I had this was about the only form I had to set, really, other than one little planter form at the end that kind of goes around the water pipes going into the building. Now, even though we use the laser to determine all these elevations, I like to double check everything with just a basic level, which is also going to be my rod board that I'm using. So at this time I can get my rod boards cut at the right length, and at the same time I can verify all the slope. For your chalk line on this, so it won't come off the wall when you start wetting down your subgrade, you want to use a red chalk line because it holds better. A blue washes right off when you start wetting the soil, so red's your best bet to go with. What I did to determine my elevations down this side yard is I checked the wall for level, and surprisingly it was pretty level considering how long it's been here. It hasn't moved or shifted, and it was built originally level, so it stayed that way. Even though we took out that big tree stump in there, it didn't disturb the wall, probably because the wall is kind of attached to the next building, so fortified it a little bit more. So this last 10 feet of pipe underground is my perforated, just to get rid of residual water that doesn't flow out. Now what we're doing here is wetting the dirt down, and then we'll run the plate compactor. That'll give us a nice flat surface, get the soil kind of tight. Not one of my favorite types of dirt to work on. Is the type where you add water and it gets muddy and sticky real quick. So when I run into dirt like this, what I like to do is flood it on the way out, and that way that water gets down deep. And when that happens, the next time you wet it, it's a lot more workable. Now I'm setting my screed pins at the high points. And what that is I can set my center screed board from the top of drain to these high points, and then I can rod in between the wall and my center screed board. Now these screed boards that I'm putting in are still, even though it's a high point, it's still a little bit lower. That way I have drainage towards the center, even though it's the high point, and then it drains to the drains from there. Like say I have 1.5 inches straight across from the drain. At the high point I will have a 1/2 inch slope, so I end up with 1 inch from the high point to the drain, and that gets away from the walls quickly, heading in the right direction. So I put a 16 duplex through there at grade to set my screed pin on. Then I put another stake in just to hold that 2x4 from falling off when I'm pouring out. Now in a situation where it's only 3 feet wide, normally what's going to happen is the concrete's going to only want to crack in one direction, which is in the short direction across the 3 foot wide ways. So you really don't need rebar going the other direction on this. You just need them, like it shows here, to the long ways. That way the cracks have a tendency not to move once it does crack. Now I'm using some 3/8 rebar, and then I'm putting them at 2 foot spacing. Although down the side yard I ran just a couple across, just kind of hold them steady, but they definitely weren't every 2 feet. Now when I pour this stuff out, I don't really use dobies or spacers or chairs or whatever you want to call them. I leave the rebar right on the ground. That way when I'm walking around, or anybody's walking around out here, it's much easier and a lot less likely to trip over them. So what I do when I start pouring the concrete, and this makes it real simple for everybody, you pull the rebar up as you're going backwards, and then the rock that's in the concrete mix holds the rebar up. So that's what it looks like when you test the drain system and you look down the drain pipe. The water is moving, which is a good sign. Now here we are pumping this thing out. We got Big Al's concrete pumping out of where is that? Norco? Yeah. Only one way to do this kind of a job, because there's no real space to come back and really work it like you'd like to. So we're going to bull float this thing on the way out, which means it's going to be a little bit slower process in the placement. Not only is it slower for that reason, but it's also slower because we have to drag the hose down a 3-foot corridor, and we have to have space to keep dragging that excess hose. So what we've got to do is break off 25-foot sections of the hose, clean the hose as we go out. You see those post brackets back there? Yeah, those are the two that we set. I actually staked them in with a steel stake. When we go over it with the knee boards, I'll just pull those steel stakes out, and those brackets will be left there. We can put a couple posts there, gate across, and some fencing, and then you'll have 2 separate yards. What we got here is one load. We're going to pump one load out here, 10 yards, 10 cubic yards of concrete. We've got about, I think we got 900 square feet here, however, so we're not going to make it to the end with this truckload. Fortunately, I'm going to be doing another job real close to this one, so I'm anticipating running short here for about maybe a yard, rather than bring another concrete truck out here and, you know, pay the short load fees and all those things. What I'll do is I'll just add an extra yard on my truck for my other job that's around the corner, and I'll pour 2 job locations out of one truck. Save a little short load fee that way. There's those post straps. Now here's what we can do. We can kind of use our whip out of some of these hallways and these other little existing patios that we left, and we can actually go through the upstairs corridor and come down these steps as well. So we do have a way to get around a little bit here. We're going to wet cut these tool joints as well. We're going to hit some major crack points, which is off the protruding corners of buildings and whatever else may be protruding into the concrete. Also, this concrete mix here that we're using is a 3000 psi. I've got some nice stealth fiber mesh in there. The strands of fiber I use are about 3/4 of an inch long. You can actually see them in the concrete, which I always like to be able to see fiber that I use. But there is some fibers that you can put in there and you really can't see them unless you use a magnifying glass. And those one, I think they're not even a 1/4 inch long strands, so I like to get them about 3/4 because I feel like they're actually going to do something at that point. I think this is kind of what it looks like before we broom it. We may have to make one more pass here, but it's looking pretty darn good. Oh, yeah, there we go. There's the broom. 50% nylon, 50% horsehair. As you can see, we have some shaded areas here and there, so that makes the concrete dry differently. So it's kind of a tricky situation getting a nice even broom, even though you got some shaded areas. So basically what we have to do is broom the stuff in the sun first, and then we have to find a way to get into those shaded areas later. Well, we got everything broomed out, and now we're putting some concrete cure on there, which I always use this time of year, because it's really hard to get a tenant to go out there and spray water on them. So what I do is spray them down with some concrete cure. That kind of takes the place of the water curing process. we were able to walk down this block wall right on top of it and spray it from up there. So that worked out real nice. It was a short block wall too. Easy to get up on. Anyway, thank you very much for watching my videos. If you like them, subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, call me or text me or email me, and I'll get back to you. Thank you. Bye.